Hi, I'm Bridget Price,
And I'm Lauren Kemp.
and this is Entrepreneurs in Progress. Almost every entrepreneur has held a traditional job. In fact, many entrepreneurs leverage a 9 to 5 to get their side hustle off the ground until it's a full-blown company. However, you may have noticed an air around entrepreneurs and their opinions around steady employment. But where does this attitude come from? Join us for a lively discussion as we talk about the differences between business owners and employees and reveal one constant truth. There's a place for everybody. Let's get started. So, Lauren, you and I have gone back and forth, and we've acknowledged and talked about this seemingly elitist attitude that entrepreneurs hold against 9 to 5ers. And it's almost as though like this path is the best path and there's only one way. And it really comes off very judgmental, I think preachy even. And it completely dismisses the need and importance for employees and working a traditional 9 to 5 job. Why do you think there are some entrepreneurs out there who kind of hold and then tout this elitist attitude?
I think there's some overlap with the hustle and grind culture crowd. So there's all that hyping up and that faking it until you make it. I think there's obviously ego, maybe a little narcissism.
Yeah.
And I think it stems from the desire to prove people wrong who doubt them, because let's face it, there are a lot of people who don't think entrepreneurs will succeed when they're starting a business. You hear that statistic, half of businesses fail within the first 5 years, of starting their business. And it's okay, yes, we know. And I think everybody has some skepticism because they know it's so hard and so many people fail. And so I think that entrepreneurs can get a very defensive, elitist attitude and think that they're special, think that they're somehow better or smarter than everyone else. And I was even listening to a podcast the other day, and I'm not going to say which one, but you can see it on any YouTube video or podcast with a lot of these content creator entrepreneurs too. And they were talking, and essentially the message was, we're special, and that people working 9 to 5 jobs are essentially suckers. And that is such a horrible viewpoint to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it is just so wrong, so elitist. And I think that's why some entrepreneurs are like that, because you have examples of it, and then they motivate people to act in that way too. And then on top of that, you have all the doubt that you're dealing with from others. So yeah. How about you? Why do you think there's the elitism in entrepreneurship?
I agree with you that I think it's spillover from the hustle and grind culture, that attitude. I also think that it is a way to inflate the ego. So they have to talk themselves up and put themselves on a pedestal to justify or defend their choice to be an entrepreneur. And I'm not sure if you recognize this in people in general, but oftentimes when people are going against the grain or what they feel is against the grain, in order to talk themselves up or to position it as though they are doing the right thing, they will, instead of discussing the benefits of being an entrepreneur or whatever it is that they are choosing to do, they will talk negatively about what they're choosing not to do. And so they expect people to relate more to that negativity because they aren't completely sold on the positives of why they're doing something that's against the grain. And
yeah, I want to say that's such a good point. Like they feel that judgment and maybe even attacked. Like if someone's questioning your choices, I was like, oh, like your choices aren't that great either, maybe.
Yeah. And it's defensive. They're already on the defense. So instead of relying on the positive attributes or reasons why they've chosen a different path, they really just talk poorly and bad about, again, why they didn't choose the other thing. And with entrepreneurs, I think some of them, quite frankly, were probably jaded in the corporate world or traditional 9 to 5, felt uninspired, a number of things. But instead of talking about pursuing their dreams or having autonomy or being in control of their future, they instead talk negatively about having steady employment and income. And in turn, I think they turn a lot of people off as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think are some of the other problems of entrepreneurs having that kind of attitude in addition to turning people off?
I think it makes entrepreneurs unrelatable. And I think that it also contributes to this overall feeling that I think a lot of entrepreneurs have felt at some point in time, where they fear that people are looking for them to fail, and they're looking for their downfall in an essence. And it's because essentially entrepreneurs have placed themselves, again, in this tier where they're comparing themselves to the greats. They're instantly saying they're going to be the next Bill Gates or Elon Musk or these really powerful figures. And it's almost like, come on, you're getting a little ahead of yourself, don't you think? And they become really unrelatable, and they ultimately end up getting more detractors than supporters.
I think it creates a lot of division between employees and owners, which makes you a less effective leader. And I think that it shows like a very single-minded or a very fixed mindset. Because when you think about entrepreneurs, you think that they have a growth mindset and abundance mindset, but there are still certain areas where you could very much have a fixed mindset. And I think that elitism is definitely showing that, because it shows a glaring lack of understanding of diverse perspectives and experiences. It's the reason why I say so much lead with empathy. Remember what it's like to be an employee. Remember what it's like to be a customer, because with that attitude of elitism, you don't have that. You can't possibly think like, how could anyone not want this? I must be special. I must be smarter than everyone, or they're just not. It's almost thinking like other people aren't capable of it. They are.
Right. And Lauren, arguably, I would say that might have contributed to our hesitance to wanting to call ourselves entrepreneurs. Our previous experiences with others who labeled themselves as such and operated in a way that seemed as though they were looking down on others who are working and not on that trailblazing path of entrepreneurship. We have been very intentional about how we want to come across in our messaging. And that elitism attitude is one that we just do not resonate with, and one that we don't believe has a place in terms of supporting other entrepreneurs and encouraging others to maybe pursue this path. And I agree with you. I do think it's a limited mindset when you feel like you have to show that you're technically better than, or your choice is better than someone else's choice.
Yeah, it's just so hard to listen to for me, because in these podcasts, like, these entrepreneurs do make some good points and have some good ideas, especially if they've seen some success. There are things that I can learn from them, but because of that attitude, I don't want to like listen to you. Like there's something missing there. And we've talked about the lack of vulnerability. So I think maybe that's part of it. And for some people, it could be a persona. I don't know, because I think that the more, divisive you are, actually, you do end up getting like the more extremist, and you get followers and like, I don't think
you get a reaction. Yes. And you do have people who support that type of thinking. I just usually think that people who follow down that negativity path, they are miserable for whatever reason. And so they gravitate towards that, unfortunately. I don't think that type of content is timeless, though. I think ultimately it won't have a mainstay or long-term stay. We'll see. But I just think that people will always resonate more with positivity over the negative aspects of promoting entrepreneurship. And I think those types of entrepreneurs give this whole thing a bad reputation. And again, I think we wrestled with, do we really want to be called entrepreneurs? We don't want to give off this sense of I'm better than you, or I'm doing something different, or because it's a very vulnerable place, like you mentioned.
I think speaking of positivity, so because there's so much content out there of that entrepreneur elitism, I want to talk about the reasons that people choose to be in 9-to-5 jobs that aren't necessarily because it's not because they're idiots and suckers. It's they
Yeah.
have reasons, normal, totally reasonable reasons for not wanting this lifestyle.
Right. Oh, Lauren, how soon we forget. Most entrepreneurs were employees, right? That's just the truth. Unless you were born into the family business and you're being groomed to run it or something like that, we've all had a job. And so at the core of this, every company, no matter who's founded it, who's starting it, whatever, they got to have employees. So it's quite odd that sometimes these entrepreneurs who practice this elite type of or classist attitude could be so, I don't know, harsh on those who choose to have 9-to-5s. We had 9-to-5s because we needed to make ends meet. We needed money. At one point in time, entrepreneurship was not our end goal, right? Like we had other aspirations that fell more in line with working a traditional 9-to-5 or a corporate job. And there are other reasons why people choose to work for someone else, right? A lot of them really, a lot of people appreciate that hard line, that separation. I'm here from 9, I leave at 5, I don't work overtime, I don't work weekends, I have a set list of responsibilities and duties, and that's it, and I'm done. And then I can go balance out my time with my family, with my friends, plan vacation. I am not taking my work home with me. And people really live by that, and that's what they want to do.
Yeah. I've had friends that I've, talked to about like entrepreneurship and stuff, and they may have thought about it, but ultimately decided that they weren't going to pursue it. And yeah, one of the reasons is because of that work-life separation. They just want to go to their job and then get their money and then have, free time to focus on other things in their life that they care about, like their kids and family or relationships, hobbies, stuff like that. And I think it's also that stability, like getting a paycheck every 2 weeks, knowing what you're going to make makes it easier to budget, plan your life, do all those kinds of things, take vacation. There's maybe people like the specific type of work that they do. As an entrepreneur, you have to wear so many hats and do a lot of work that you don't want to do, don't like doing, because you have to be a generalist in some ways. And so if you're someone who loves doing a specific type of thing, then yeah, like why would you want to go into entrepreneurship if you're happy doing this thing that you love doing? Some people I know don't want to take on a lot of risk. So they're risk averse. They have families to support. And let's face it, it's less stressful.
It really is. I mean,
or at least it can be. I have been stressed in jobs. You can't obviously be stressed in your job.
Oh, there's tons of stress with employers. You could be working in a toxic environment. You could have a really unsupportive supervisor, boss. You could have really sucky hours, whatever the case may be. There's definitely stress, but sometimes in relation to pursuing entrepreneurship, if you had to compare the stress, they are different. And we go to sleep with our businesses on our mind typically, and then we wake up to it as well. And very little time in between as we're building our companies do we have a lot, significant free time just to not think about it.
Yeah. And I've noticed too, because of the elitism content, elitism attitude from entrepreneurs, I have started seeing some content push back on it from 9-to-5ers. So it's becoming a back and forth thing. And I saw one point out, hey, sometimes you make more money working 9-to-5 than all these entrepreneurs who fake some of that glamorous lifestyle. I think you brought up a stat from last season that like the average small business owner makes maybe $70,000 a year.
It's about 70 to 72,000.
Yeah, which is a good, that's a good salary, but you can definitely make more doing a 9-to-5 elsewhere and have that work-life balance and take vacations and have less stress. And, that's a lot of work.
It's really up to the person and what they're choosing to budge on or what they're willing to sacrifice in place of something else. So 70,000 is great for someone who feels like they've run their business autonomously. They work maybe 10 hours a week and they've gotten it to a place to where they're not so involved or necessary. For some people who, like my husband, who was used to making a significant amount of money and to maybe even take a little bit of a pay cut while he's growing his business, that can cause some reflection and, okay, am I doing this for the right reason? Yes, for him, he is, because he likes having his time and owning his time. And that can be worth more than a slight bump in pay for a full-time employer. But yeah, sometimes you can make more money working full-time somewhere else. It's just a matter of, again, what you like to do, if it falls in line with your vision, and if it gets you to your ideal end goal or your situation.
I think you brought up an interesting thing that I want to ask you about. I've only been working full-time on Rotiv for a year and a half. Brian has only been doing it for 2 years. You guys are a couple years ahead of us. Are you finding it harder to relate to your employees the longer you have distance from being one yourself?
Man, that is a really great question. We've been talking about this a lot lately because, quite honestly, I've had trouble relating to some of like my people in my personal life, like my friends and my family. And with regard to the employees, yes and no. So I'm pretty much on the ground, essentially. So I have a really good pulse on what's going on with my employees. So I feel like I can relate to them more than maybe Marcus can. And part of the reason is, I'll just give an example. With regard to some of our employees or staff members, they'll ask for, depending on what's going on in their life, they might ask for a pay advance or something like that. And typically we don't really have a process for that. It's been like a case by case basis. And usually what's leading with empathy, I always say yes, because I'm trying to make sure that they feel like they have a place that they can confide into us if they need something, or we can show that we're supporting them and that type of thing. Marcus is not really a fan of that because obviously like he doesn't want it to be like a repetitive thing, something that they depend on, a crutch, that type of thing. And it's more about him being like systematized. Everyone's treated the same way, that type of thing. And for me, I feel like it's harder for him to relate sometimes in that regard because I hear the stories from our staff or from our contractors or what they're going through. And so working closely with them allows me not to be so far removed from their experiences as an employee. Also fielding a lot of their complaints, whether it's directly to our admin staff who then relay it back to me, or if they reach out to me directly and communicate what their issues are. At first, what happens is when I feel like I can't relate immediately, I have to take a step back. So I have to really work at putting myself in their shoes to understand exactly what their issue is and what they're complaining about or what they need in order to better help them. And sometimes, to be quite honest, a lot of our contractors or cleaners, they have never had like corporate experience. Sometimes I'll operate in a very formal way and they just don't get it. Emails really, they hate emails. They prefer like SMS or something like that. They aren't checking their email regularly. What else? Some of the language that they use sometimes is a little business heavy. They don't really, never heard of the word or they don't understand. And sometimes I'm thinking at such a high level that I forget to make sure I know or remember the audience that I'm speaking to. And in that way, yes, sometimes I am struggling to relate to my employees, but never from a place where I feel like they're crazy for working for us or they need to start their own company or business. I definitely feel like I'm still pretty grounded in that regard.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a good point. Like, it's not my first natural instinct either. I think that it does require effort. It does require taking a step back and actively practicing empathy. So yeah, I was just curious because I can't remember when I was talking to Brian, but we were talking about, I was telling him a story about how like Oprah was asked
about the $100 gift.
Yeah.
That lives rent free in my head. And that is something that I try to avoid.
Yeah. So for those of you listening who aren't familiar with the story, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, Bridget, but Oprah was being asked, what kind of gift would you recommend for something that's like on the cheaper side, essentially? And she named something that was like at least $100, maybe like $125 or $150.
Yeah.
And the person responded like, oh no, like that's still too much for one gift. And she was kind of like, What do you mean? Who doesn't have $100 to spend on a gift? And I was like, oh,
and it was such an involuntary response. Like, you can probably Google or YouTube, search for this video or this clip because she's on a red carpet. But she had such an incredulous look on her face. She's like, "What? You don't have $100?" Like, and I think in that moment you could see just how far removed she became from even her fans or people who look up to her, and that Oprah can't even name a gift that's under $100. Yeah. And I don't fault her for that, but yeah, sometimes you can get to a space where you're operating in these spaces where you do become further removed from other individuals. And yeah, I mean, that scenario always lives in my head. I would have to say that the opposite also happened for me when I started focusing on our businesses full time. I was able to relate more to previous employers of mine or previous companies that I worked for and understanding their plights that I hadn't understood before, didn't quite grasp or comprehend. So I've had the reverse happen to me.
I feel like I've understood them a little bit more, but sometimes I still disagree with how they run things.
Oh yeah, I still disagree. And I still disagree with some of the people they put in place to run their organizations, people who they put in place to manage others, how they manage people. Oh yeah, I totally still disagree. But I was able to have a slight better understanding as to what they were up against and what they were tasked with. And also feeling validated and knowing they did not know what the fuck they were doing. It wasn't just maybe I have a hunch, but okay, yeah, I know for sure they know what the hell they were doing and they were faking it till they made it type of thing.
Ooh, I have a question that I just thought of too. So do you think, because obviously entrepreneurs can remember their employee experiences. Sometimes they forget and lose a little bit out of touch. But do you think 9-to-5ers or employees can ever really understand the entrepreneurial experience without having gone through it themselves? Because I feel like that's where some of the division is too. It's like entrepreneurs are out of touch and they don't understand employees, but also employees do not understand what it's like to try and run and build a business.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible to bridge that gap? Or is it just something that they won't, like, is it elitist to say they just won't understand until they're in it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think they will ever fully understand it until they're in it, until they run their own company, but they can get bits and pieces. A lot of startup companies want people with an entrepreneurial mindset. They want people who are entrepreneurs who can innovate and do things and run projects inside of an organization to help them perform better or grow their revenue streams. But until you actually run a company and start a company from the ground up, there are just going to be some aspects of entrepreneurship that you won't truly understand. And the pressures are different. I've worked in spaces where they asked you to have an entrepreneurial mindset. And I've worked on projects for hours on end, into the hours of the night, not getting paid for overtime and feeling like I'm contributing right to this greater cause and feeling invested as well. But ultimately still not fully understanding what was at stake. And I have the wherewithal now to recognize that I was being asked to do a very specific job, but I didn't know all the financials. I didn't know all the reasoning or the strategy behind what was going on. I didn't know about all the inside things that were happening between like investors. I wasn't privy to a lot of those conversations, and those conversations definitely dictate how you operate or how you move within a business. And sometimes when you're an employee, you're asked to do something very specific and you just will not always glean that insight. So
I think too, for me, like it's not only not being privy to those conversations, it's not even being aware of those areas or conversations, because it's not our jobs. It's not something I had to ever worry about. I was just worried about the specific thing that I was hired to do. And I never really thought about those different things that you think about in entrepreneurship. I feel like I had no idea until Brian and I were in it, what it's really like.
Until you got bitch slapped with it.
Yeah. And I know I'm like,
That's how I felt. I got bitch slapped all over the place. Like I wasn't expecting like this coming this way, this coming that way. Yeah, it was
but
a lot.
that was also my personality, because I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who think about these things, think about higher level things, even though they're working a 9-to-5 job and doing whatever they're hired to.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're high level where you're part of those conversations, or you're a VP or whatever. So yeah.
Even when you're like in those higher positions, if you're a C-suite executive or executive management or whatever, like sometimes you still don't make the final call, right? I don't think being an employee, even a high level employee, will ever prepare you completely to be an entrepreneur. It does help.
Yeah.
I definitely believe my experiences have helped elevate our company and position it in a unique way that other cleaning companies haven't had the same experience. But yeah, I think there's always teaching moments. And I think what you're alluding to is that I think some people will always have a natural curiosity. They will always inquire and they'll always want to glean some information or learn it, maybe dip their toe in it a little bit. But man, there's nothing like doing it. That's the best teacher, unfortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah. I think that's also where some of the elitist attitude comes from, is
walk a mile in my shoes, that type of thing.
There is some belief, even among you and me, that I don't know if you can fully know until you've done it. And we don't try to be elitist, but this is based off of our own experience from being an employee to becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And to that point, Lauren, I still don't know shit compared to what other entrepreneurs have experienced or where their businesses are at what point in stage, or comparatively to other businesses in different industries that require way more infrastructure than what our cleaning company requires. A cleaning company requires way more than I initially thought it did. You know what I mean? Like never was even thinking about it. It was not on my radar, but it still isn't even what some of these high level or tech companies or other mainstay type of companies go through. I feel like we're barely scratching the surface. And I say that with humility because I think it just goes to show that even when you think you know, you don't know. And I think that's the best attitude to have. But yeah, I do think that entrepreneurs are always struggling to prove themselves. And I think that's really at the crux of this elitist attitude, just trying to have someone else believe in them. It's a lot easier, I think, with that conquer and divide kind of mentality, break someone down so you can build yourself up. Again, very short-sighted, very unfortunate, and quite honestly unnecessary. Because again, you have to have people work for you.
There's this Big Lebowski quote that Brian and I like to quote. It's "You're not wrong, Walter. You're just an asshole." It's like some of the shit you're saying is insightful and correct and accurate, but you're being an asshole about it.
Yeah, you're being a jerk,
and you don't need to.
Yeah, no, you really don't. And I would love to have a conversation with those entrepreneurs who are really like thriving or thinking they're thriving off of this negative ideology around pitting entrepreneurs against 9-to-5ers. Like, why do you feel the need to sell being an entrepreneur by downplaying someone who's working a traditional job? What's the point? What's the purpose? And again, obviously the psychology, right? They're playing on the fact that we joke about this all the time. It's common in pop culture. I mean, motherfuckers hate their job. Like, people do not like working. Let's just lay that out there. If anyone could do anything else, their top of their mind would not be to work if they had a choice. They would go
or
travel.
Work on whatever they want to do.
Yeah. And this is not speaking to those unique individuals who just like, they can't imagine their life without work. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the majority of the population. The work jokes exist. The Office existed, the TV show, because people really just hate the idea of traditional work in that regard. People are constantly fighting for more time off. They're fighting for other benefits like paid parental leave for both parents. They're fighting for extended benefits. They're fighting for investment, stock, all of these things. They want to be paid for their time. They want their time to be valued. And so there are obviously these entrepreneurs who are expressing these classist ideas. They are pulling at individuals' heartstrings with regard to like how much disdain they have for their employment. Yeah, I don't want to freaking work Monday through Friday, or yeah, like I want to work from an island in Hawaii, and yeah, I want to do XYZ. And so to that end, some people can relate. And yeah, it sucks that I have to wear this uniform, or I have to, clock in and clock out, and I have a 30-minute lunch. But again, we know that there's a lot of hype behind all of that. We know you're not an immediate success when you first start out as an entrepreneur.
And there are trade-offs. There's like
significant trade-offs.
People work 9 to 5s. We've already gone through them. They are trading off for that stability. We are trading.
I don't think anyone gets to decide what the trade-off is. You don't get to tell someone that you should do this because it's the trade-off you get. That person needs to determine what their trade-offs are going to be and what they want them to be. And
well, yeah, because when they're talking about the glamorization of entrepreneurship, they're not telling what the sacrifices, the trade-offs are. And you only hear the negative side of 9 to 5s, and you only hear the positive side of entrepreneurship.
Exactly.
And there's no balance.
And I would also argue that, Lauren, with regard to downplaying 9 to 5, outside of like people hating their jobs or people not being fulfilled in their jobs, what these entrepreneurs like to do in terms of their language or messaging is imply that a 9 to 5er is lazy, or they suggest that they aren't willing to put in the work, that they don't want this lifestyle, that they are better than them because they see something bigger for themselves. And again, it's very negative. And I don't know how you're going to win people over that way. I don't want someone to tell me that I'm lazy or I'm unmotivated or whatever the case may be as a way to pull me in.
I don't know. They have followers.
Yeah.
There's a reason hustle and grind culture exists. There are plenty of people who buy into it and who buy into this attitude. Now, I want to say obviously not everybody, not all successful entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs in general have this elitist attitude, but I do think it's prevalent enough, and it's enough of a stereotype in itself, which is why we are addressing it. But obviously, there are humble entrepreneurs, humble business owners, and CEOs and people out there. And
yeah, I do think even the ones who are negative about people who decide on working in traditional employment, I honestly think at the core of all of that, they really just want to feel like they belong. And they really want to feel like, again, they want to validate their decision to pursue entrepreneurship. Because let's be 100% real. All of us, all entrepreneurs have considered going back to work, not because we want to per se, but because it might be in the best interest of our pockets, of our household. For some entrepreneurs, like one thing that they have to factor in or weigh is I need health insurance. Like the best way to do that is to get that through employment. Yeah. So every entrepreneur I feel has considered weighed going back to work. Sometimes entrepreneurs get an opportunity where someone reaches out to them and proposes a job offering for them that they can customize, that they can make their own. And depending on what things you're working through as a professional, you might like this job opportunity. It might be that you might be at a place in your life where you're like tapped out as an entrepreneur. And this opportunity came to you at the right time for you to transition out.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I know you've brought that up, that someone has approached you about like what sounded like a good job opportunity. And I know that since we've done this podcast, there was a really good recruitment message from the head of this team at a tech company, and really liked what we were saying on our podcast, and we could use someone like you. And
oh wow,
I was like, oh, this could be like a really good job. I could go back into being the tech world, making money and being appreciated and part of this great team and all the warm fuzzies. This person was a Salesforce alum. And so I was like, oh, that sounds so wonderful. But I was not in a place where I was like, no, I love doing what, we're doing. And I think you, like you said, we had talked about, you had a similar person reach out to you about a director position or a job that sounded really nice.
Yeah, it sounded great. It sounded like something I would have jumped at 5 years ago. And it's funny because I think sometimes when you have things that you feel are unfinished business or unfulfilled, you feel pulled in that direction when those opportunities present itself. But then when you're on this path or on this journey, you really get great at, I shouldn't say great, but you do get better at making these really important decisions. And you really get better at making sure you do what's best for you and not budging on that. And it's hard, right? Because flattery gets people really far, right? They work themselves in. You start thinking about, even if you resonate with the company or person that's reached out to you, like you feel inspired to want to contribute or help in some way. Oh yeah, I feel like I could really help turn some things around here.
And get a steady paycheck again, and make really good money again. And that's super appealing.
And meet some new people and build your network. And I think naturally entrepreneurs, we always vet our opportunities because we don't know what it can turn into. We don't know how it can actually help grow our business somehow. So we always, I think, look at opportunities very seriously. But I think that depending on where you are in the process, if you're in a place to consider that employment or if you want to continue in your business. For me, as you already know, staying in the business was necessary for me right now. The company needs me, and I couldn't imagine stepping away at such a pivotal time and growth phase in our company. We're very close to that 8333. And so I want to make sure that we can sustain that. And then who knows what will happen in the future. But yeah, that's a really great point. Like you want to make sure that you never say never, quite honestly.
Yeah. So coming back to elitism, how do we as entrepreneurs get rid of that culture, that elitist attitude culture?
I think that a lot of people there's going to be people who are just going to relate to that type of messaging. Again, for a number of reasons. Some people can feel really jaded at work. Some people can really like the keeping it real or telling it like it is type of stance that these entrepreneurs have in their messaging. But I think it'll be a very small segment over time. One of the things we can do within the entrepreneur community is just recognize that there are just two different lifestyles, two different paths. One is not better than the other. We don't know what any individual circumstances are. And so we shouldn't prejudge, right? We should accept that these are two unique ways of making money, being an entrepreneur or working for someone else. Those aren't the only two ways, but those are just two ways that people earn a living. And I think it's important. I think you raised an important question earlier, Lauren, with regard to making sure we can relate to our employees as entrepreneurs. And I think that is important. You don't want to be so far removed from what your employees are going through that you start creating processes or procedures, or you start operating in your business in such a way that you ultimately won't have people working for you.
I completely agree with you. I think there are always going to be some segment of people who have that attitude. But I do think that us recognizing that, like you said, there's two different ways to make money. There's two different lifestyles. One's not better than the other is completely correct. And that I think too, what we can do is what we're doing is we're talking about it. We're creating content that rejects that kind of attitude and idea. And I haven't seen too much of that kind of content or people talking about, like entrepreneurs talking about it. So hopefully even just talking about it in this episode can help with some of that. But it's hard. It's hard to bridge the gap because, as we mentioned earlier, we're not even sure that we believe employees can ever fully understand what it's like to be an entrepreneur. And then it's very easy for entrepreneurs to fall out of touch and lose that empathy and forget what it's like to be an employee. So I think it just takes active work.
I think it's important to be rooted in your beliefs, right? Sometimes entrepreneurs could be riding a wave so high that they feel so good about themselves and they're puffing up their chests and they think they've made it. But typically there's some type of adversity or challenge that's right around the corner. And so I think if you stay down to earth, stay rooted, it'll make navigating being an entrepreneur that much easier. And you won't feel the need to deflate someone else's ego or their confidence to build yourself up. You can just be understanding.
Yeah. That's so true. I find it funny when like entrepreneurs are like just so confident that they're killing it and they're always going to be killing it. And they're like only a few years into business. It's like businesses can have an amazing year one year and then be absolutely leveled and destroyed the next year. Like,
yeah,
just because you're riding high right now, like you and I think, try to not take these like those kinds of growth and momentum for granted, but I definitely hear people on other podcasts not.
Yeah.
It's just like that almost unearned but also unearned confidence,
right? And
or arrogance.
Entrepreneurs need confidence for sure, but a lot of newer entrepreneurs can mistakenly take a great year and rev up, and sometimes they get luck of the draw and they believe that they've made the right decision. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I did this. And they use that to promote elitist attitudes unknowingly sometimes. And some of the things that they share, what they promote. Again, I think subconsciously you can show like an elitist attitude around entrepreneurship just by only sharing your successes. So I think by balancing that out, you will appear more relatable. And I think entrepreneurs should be wary of that. I think naturally as humans, we don't always want to share the ugly or the bad. But when you don't, it definitely can come off as though you have it all figured out. And that can subconsciously make people feel away.
Yeah, I think that sharing the experience, the whole experience, will help with that. I think that's what we're trying to do here is we're trying to share what it's like to be an entrepreneur in depth as we're going through it, to help with the empathy on the other side and to dispel the myth and glamorization that a lot of entrepreneurs tout.
Yeah, we've definitely been through it. And I'm glad, I'm happy again that we are able to document this. I'm glad we are infusing unique content into this sphere of entrepreneurship and sharing kind of our ups and downs and our highs and our lows, and not being blinded by entrepreneurship that we can't call out some of the bad habits that other entrepreneurs can exhibit or have. So I really have appreciated this episode, and I think some of our listeners will really be able to fill us on a lot of our points and, you know, what we've had to say about it.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully. That might sound a little too confident, so got to be careful there. But anyways, we'll go ahead and end on that note. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, all the things. You can follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. Make sure to connect with Lauren and me on LinkedIn. And until next time, thanks, Lauren.
Yeah.